Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Let's Go Outdoors. Michael Short here. And I don't know if you know this or not, but we are in the middle of Alberta Forestry Week. Now, a few weeks ago, I did a story about a forestry proposal in the Chip Lake area. And I'll have to say, I got lots of response about that story. And someone who did reach out to me, and we had a really pleasant phone call. Ray Hiltz, he's been 30 years in the forestry industry, and he called me and said, there's some other things to understand about forestry, and especially when it comes to clear cutting. And Ray, thanks so much for agreeing to have yourself recorded, I guess, basically, and have a conversation with us.
Yeah, no problem. It's great to be here. I've watched some of your YouTube and some of your episodes online, so it's a real honor to be here today.
So let me start off with, I guess, when somebody hears the term clear cut, and I'm certainly guilty of it, I'm thinking moonscape. I'm thinking like it's the area that's being proposed to be cut is just going to look like nothing that we've ever seen before. How wrong is that perception?
Well, I think certainly it's interesting you say that. I mean, that's probably the single biggest question I get from friends and people that know me, knowing my career in forestry, is why do we clear cut? And when people ask that, it tends to be from a negative connotation, right? Is clear cutting is bad. And I don't really think people fully understand what clear cutting means and kind of the practice of how we harvest timber in Alberta. And certainly there's leanings towards BC from the 90s and the forestry wars and large logging operations in very pristine areas in BC. But in the context of Alberta, clear cutting is a way to extract timber supply from a forest, and not to make direct comparisons to farming, but when you look at farming, you're growing a crop, and that crop is harvesting, and effectively you're clear cutting a crop to recover the merchantable part of that plant, which is the grain, et cetera. And so forestry is similar in a way that we have to go into the forest and we have to extract timber. And there's ways to do it. Clear cutting is a way where you extract timber, and it's driven by the species biology, the ecology of forests, and what we're trying to create there in terms of a disturbance pattern. And so we're trying to emulate to some degree forest fires. Forest fires tend to be large fire replacing forest replacing forest fires tend to burn large areas, burn much of the timber, and are irregular in patterns. And so what we've done in Alberta is try to do that to some degree. And ironically, if we were actually to try to emulate forest fires, we would have to cut much bigger areas to extract timber to be more consistent with fire behavior and the fire regimes that we have in Alberta.
That's an interesting point, and I guess maybe the counterpoint to that is we've experienced a great deal of wildfires in Alberta over recent years, and certainly right. British Columbia. Does the practice then of forestry sort of needs to be tailored back because we are losing so much habitat due to forest fires, or do they still outpace the forest fire situation in terms of forestry?
Yeah, I think one has to look at forestry as a tool in the toolbox to manage Alberta's forests. One thing I think people have to remember is, our forests in Alberta are to some degree second growth and have been actively managed for over 100 years. And when I say that is we've actively suppressed fires. We've created quite an irregular structure of forest throughout Alberta because we've done that. And so when you look at the natural regime, the natural pattern we would typically see in forests, we probably wouldn't have the older age classes like we have. We probably wouldn't have forest structure like we have that's more susceptible to large campaign fires. And I think the counter argument to that is we should do more active management of our forests. And when I say active management, I don't necessarily mean just cutting timber, but managing stands, managing a structure within those stands to reduce extreme fire behavior. Forest fires, the heat in the fire itself is one thing. The ignition sources, i.e. lightning, et cetera, are one thing, but the forest structure, the fuel that's there on the ground, and that has to be actively managed. And I think that's one thing to keep in mind, is how do we do that? And forestry is to me the primary mechanism to do that. Now, like I said, clear cutting and harvesting timber is one of the tools in the toolbox, but doing nothing, which we've done for quite literally decades within the white zone of the province, has kind of created a bit of a predicament for us, in that we should expect to see more severe fire behavior both in the green area and the white area of the province. And so what do you do about that? And I think forestry is a great answer to helping with that.
I guess the tougher question is, how do we balance the not in my backyard syndrome?
Sure.
You were indicating even that you're looking at an opportunity to do some recreational businesses, and if something like this were to go ahead, that you would be pretty upset about it as well. So how does one balance that, recognize the need for forestry, active logging versus, well, but this is happening and I may have a business associated with it, or a trap line,
Right.
recreational opportunities.
Right. And I think that comes down to, communication, of the forest companies and government in general, communicating with stakeholders on what the plans are, and having those stakeholders involved in how they do what they do. And, that's no small task, especially when you look at, either the white zone proposal that's out there, or any operation. I've worked on behalf of stakeholder groups in and around Whitecourt, Snowmobile Club, et cetera, who deal with other land users who are impacting infrastructure and things that people are doing out there. And it really does come down to communication, and a responsibility of all parties to sit down and talk about that. In particular, in the white area, something like this RFP would be quite new, to see some scale of timber harvesting consistently over the next 5 years. But at the end of the day, I truly believe that those people have an opportunity to have a voice, so connecting with a successful proponent, influencing patterns and designs of cut blocks that has not been predetermined, and location within the region. In particular, the RFP goes north of Fort Assiniboine, south of Highway 16, almost to Edson, and then almost to Edmonton. So it's a fairly large area, and it's a fairly large RFP area, i.e. there's over 100,000 hectares available. The successful proponent's only going to be able to cut 2,500 over the next 5 years. And so the impact should be relatively small, but where our timber harvesting happens, et cetera, the local people should have a say in how that happens. And I believe they would. And it's incumbent upon them too to engage in the process when that's folded out by the government and the successful person.
Do you feel, Ray, that all concerned do a good job with communicating? And I'm not trying to point fingers at any one group, but from the top down, do we do a good enough job to say, this is what we're looking at? Because it seems to me that somebody catches wind of whether it's a coal mine, an oil or gas project, forestry, it's a pretty gut-wrenching reaction that, oh my, we just can't allow that to happen.
Yeah, I think there's always room for improvement in terms of communication, and in particular engagement, right? When you look at forest management planning in Alberta, especially in the green area, there's a responsibility of all the companies and anybody involved to have an advisory committee that contributes to their planning and how they do what they do. In particular in the white area, that's absent because this is a brand new process. We typically haven't seen anything of this scale before, and so communication is critical. And there's government, there's I wouldn't say industry, but whoever wins the bid on this proposal is going to have a responsibility to connect with the community, and not only deciding, like I said, where they decide to harvest But the configuration of the blocks, where the roads go, the timing, all the operational considerations that go hand in hand with timber harvesting. And so my hope that would happen. And in particular, people at Chip Lake that had offered concerns in your video, and others within the region for that matter, should really do their best to plug into that process when it unfolds.
So when it does come to understanding habitat and the movements of critters within a certain area, is there a conscious effort to try and mitigate the disturbance? I mean, obviously trees are going to go and that's going to have an impact, but can they be done in a way that animals have time to adjust to or find new habitat?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of how forest management planning is done in Alberta, again, in the green area, there are course level considerations in terms of wildlife habitat, species, et cetera. And then there's fine filter, right? So through the forest management planning process, which is your 30,000 foot level planning that goes on, there's a lot of considerations for wildlife and wildlife habitat, types of habitats, timing, temporal distribution of habitat. And then there's fine filter, where you get on the ground and you say, okay, we're actually going to do some work in this particular area, of maybe a specific species or specific plant type, or whatever the case may be. You'll make operational adjustments to consider those things. And so my understanding is, in the white area, the RFP, they'll be using ground rules. Ground rules are basically your operating standards, provincial operating rules or ground rules to implement these harvesting activities. And so that has a lot of the detail in there in terms of what the successful proponent would have to do, and considerations they'd have to have.
All right, we'll leave it there, Ray. Once again, thank you so much for reaching out and providing some insight into the forestry situation here in Alberta. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.